Sorry, sometimes you just can't help but dance, you know. Those of us that are under 80, why don't we just stand and dance for 20 seconds? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Come on. If you're under 80, stand up and dance. Okay, that's enough. That's really sick and gross. I'm sorry. Clint, where are you? Still here? Hey, buddy. You know, when you talked about Jesus and the full head of hair, you've only been talking about pictures that people painted in the 1500s, okay? We have no idea, and there's a strong possibility that you and Jesus have very similar hairstyles, okay? I'm just letting you know that, brother, all right? You're good. You're one of the brothers, all right? You good? Thank you. I hope a lot of you probably have been here for a while, and you've heard about Road Trip for years and years, but do you realize, have you ever really thought about it? Because what an incredible thing that Road Trip is. I mean, I've been around HCC for 21 years, on and off before we moved back and forth to California during that. But through all that, we still stayed connected. And this road trip has been kind of at the center almost that entire time. What a powerful expression of the beauty of the movement we call HCC, Harbor Christian Center. And as we've been in this, what some call a transition, and I call it kind of God doing a new thing in a community that's been doing some beautiful new things for a long time. This road trip is really one of those things that kind of is the greatest expression of the HCC community. So I hope, even if you do something for an hour in the next month, if you just give a little bit extra of what God has given you to the road trip, boy, do it. Because as we give ourselves away, as we participate in God's work among those who simply need a helping hand, as we all do, a friendship, something that makes their life better and makes this world better in the name of Christ. That's what this road trip's about. And that we have the great privilege to partner with so many organizations and so many different people. So I really hope every single one of us finds a little slice of our next month to try to figure out how we can participate with this. So this is our final talk in our Fit Check series. And hopefully you now know what Fit Check is, whether you're online, this is the first time you've seen it. We've been talking about it for a month. And this Fit Check is kind of this idea that I wear what I want to project, and then I put it on the web and ask people to fit check, okay? My fitness check. How am I looking? What do you think? And so when I come up here, I realize many other people go, oh, I could never do that. Chap is just so put together. It's unbelievable. That is hilarious. You realize that. And Nick, I think you look great. Tucked in or tucked out. Doesn't matter, brother. You got it. You're a fit check mannequin right there. I feel like I'm walking through Nordstrom's every time I see you. So that's a great joy. The Tacoma Nordstrom's. Okay, so. All right. Sorry, I don't really know what that meant, but it was funny in my head, which about 20% of the time it translates. So that's a whole different conversation. A long time ago, over 20 years ago, I had the chance to go to Copenhagen, to Denmark, to give a class, actually, at the University of Copenhagen. And man, what a beautiful opportunity, fantastic. And I took a walk often around the town, and I ran across this statue. That's the Little Mermaid. That's the cleanest version of it for Christians that are in America, not really excited about her wardrobe or lack of it. But that's the Little Mermaid. And you can take that off now. Some people are going to be thinking about that the rest of the time we're talking. And I don't know if you know where he comes from. Hans Christian Andersen wrote about the Little Mermaid in 1837, almost 200 years ago. Hans Christian Andersen was such an iconic figure in Denmark and throughout the world. His stories, basically my experience with walking by this beautiful, very large actually, but sitting on a rock, this mermaid is an iconic treasure of the Danish people, of the Denmark people. And In 1952, I discovered that I had seen this movie, not in 1952, I'm not that old, but with Danny Kaye actually was Hans Christian Andersen. Maybe some of you have actually seen that movie. Well, when I came home from my time in Denmark, I actually looked that up because I was so moved by this statue and what it represented for all the people that lived there. And I kind of got into the movie and then his songs. And there was one song that he sang that came from a story written in 1837 that Hans Christian Andersen wrote 200 years ago called The Emperor's New Clothes. I don't know if you remember it or not. It was a story that he wrote about almost 200 years ago, where the emperor had some men come to him that were these magical kind of seamster guys that actually put together these beautiful clothes, but they were magic clothes. So if the king, the emperor, would wear these clothes, anybody that was kind of unworthy or not loyal or not really with it, they would not see anything. It would just be all invisible. But to everybody else, it was the most beautiful set of clothes. And the king goes, of course, I want that. This is Hans Christian Andersen writing about this. And Danny Kaye does a beautiful song. The king was in the altogether, the altogether, the altogether. The king was in the altogether, as naked as he could be. I don't know if you ever heard that before. And that was not actually even in key. Okay. Which is why I'm never here in the band. I just want to point that out. Or anybody sitting next to me when we sing. Interesting point of the story is we're easily swept away because the king was duped by these kind of shysters that were basically not doing anything and not giving him anything and telling the king that only those who were fit for service, who were loyal, who were smart, who were part of the king's closest allies, they were the ones that could see the magical clothes that he'd be wearing. And unbeknownst to him, there was no such clothes. The king was tricked, and so were all his friends until he went out in a parade. That's the story. And everybody had heard the story, so they didn't want to be seen like a fool. So they cheered and yelled for the king and how great the clothes were. But one little child didn't get the message. And this is the beautiful story. A long time ago, 200 years ago almost. But this little boy saw that and said, "The king's naked." The king, what? The king's as naked as the day he was born. That's the story. Because the brilliance of why Hans Christian Andersen's stories have lasted for hundreds of years is because they point out the truth of how we live our lives in ways that we all can identify with without being so wholly offended or just dismiss it outright. That Hans Christian Andersen story of the emperor's new clothes, well, we are easily swept away by ideas and what we call truth that may be skewed or even dangerous. That's his point, is that this king was duped by people that actually said things that were not true, and all of the people around that king supported that lie and didn't want to be seen as a fool by not buying in. It's called groupthink in social science, where we grab so tightly onto a way of thinking about life and the world, and regardless if it blinds us to what is actually going on. And that's what Hans Christian Andersen wrote about. Fit check is what we're talking about. We may think what we're wearing is right and good and honorable, and we can even thank God for his applause as we wear the attitudes and perspectives and convictions as we move through our lives. In other words, what Hans Christian Andersen in his brilliance of this children's story pointed out was this idea that we have this propensity to make sure that we follow those that we feel like we can really step into. That we listen to voices and we get perspectives that often we take on ourselves and we wear those clothes, even though they're really often a sham. Jesus came to shatter that. And yet it is such a human story throughout all the centuries. And in Hans Christian Andersen, this is almost 200 years ago, and it still is a very well-known fable. Well, as we wrap up Fit Check, the idea of what is it we project? What is it we wear? The Bible uses the metaphor of put on, put off. And it's really an important metaphor in Scripture because it's trying to describe what it is that we may be trying to figure out on the inside, but with God's call and God's help, we can live into whatever it is that we put on the outside. We bring life to the clothes that we wear, metaphorically or physically. And that's what this series is about. There's a word we're going to look at today to summarize this, and this is the reason we did this sermon, because last summer I heard a quote from somebody who was famous, who took on a word. And I hadn't heard it as a bad word until this person spoke it. The word is called empathy. And ever since I heard that, I've been so deeply disturbed by the rhetoric that emerged out of the conversation of a word that's taken on such life of its own. Now, it had been going on for a while that I didn't know about until I started really listening and watching. Empathy. It's a word that's been under attack from all sides. It's been the book's titled, Toxic Empathy. Some even talk about it as the sin of empathy. On the one hand, this is what was said that caught my attention, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. The fundamental weakness, this is a very powerful, influential person in our culture, of Western civilization is this thing called empathy. But here's what's important to know, is with all the people that have taken on empathy from one side of the political spectrum, there are people on all sides of the political spectrum that have used the concept of, is empathy good or is empathy not good? Is empathy destructive? Does empathy get in the way of our purposes and the way we wear our clothes engaging with the world? In other words, is empathy something that we embrace, or is empathy something that we ought to be cautious about? And you can see in these next, it comes from both sides of the political spectrum. David French is one of the religion writers for the New York Times, and some of you may love that, and some of you may hate that simply because you see the name of the publication. Isn't that interesting? David French said after the 2016 election, Democrats debated how much empathy they should extend to the new president's supporters. This is getting hammered from both sides. Empathy. I never thought about empathy as something that could be possibly seen as negative. What is empathy? Well, Brené Brown helps us with this idea, this metaphor of should we put on empathy? Or as some are saying, when we do, are we making a mistake? When we think we're wearing the best of clothing, but actually even a small child could tell us how wrong we are. And even what we're saying and celebrating with the emperor's clothes, it takes a small child to call us out to what is actually true and real. Empathy is not in your Bible, but it's a concept, a word that's included throughout the Scriptures. So let's take a look. What is empathy? Fit check. What do we wear related to this word empathy? Brené Brown helps us with this little vignette she has here.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, Not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So that's Brené Brown, noted sociologist. Maybe you've read her stuff, heard about her. Brené Brown actually has a very significant mission, and that is to help people to think more deeply about how we live, treat each other, and think about ourselves in the process. The idea of empathy versus sympathy. Sympathy is distant, empathy steps in. But Jesus consistently teaches us what true empathy is. What is empathy, and can there be too much or misdirected empathy? Can there be toxic empathy, as many people are saying today, from regardless of the political perspective? Well, there's a passage of Scripture that, just to give an example of how Jesus exemplified the characteristic that's not specifically used in the Bible because it's a word that wasn't really in the popular lexicon until about 1901. And so therefore this predated all of the English translations. But the concept of empathy is rooted throughout Scriptures. Let's take a look at Luke chapter 19, 1-10. Perhaps you've heard this passage before. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Perhaps many of you have actually heard of this text. Where are you standing in the story? Would you be standing alongside Jesus as one of the disciples who are simply really engaged with what's going on as he parades himself through the streets? Are you standing in the crowd watching him go by? That's okay. Are you one that sees yourself in the midst of a crowd looking at Jesus and trying to make a determination? What do I do with this person, this man? A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come on down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Many of us know the passage. If this is brand new to you, just as you focus on it, imagine this guy, a wealthy and a tax collector. The reason he was wealthy, because a tax collector at that time, if they were wealthy, it's because what they did was they ripped off their fellow Jews. They were under Roman occupation. The Romans would hire people to collect taxes And these people that were tax collectors would take more money than even the Romans were asking for, and so they would become very wealthy. They would rob from their own people, getting rich at the occupation of the Roman troops in their country. That's what was going on. Then he tried to see Jesus. He's walking by from a distance. I'm just trying to look, but I can't see, so he runs ahead. He gets in this tree up ahead, and he thinks, I'm anonymous. I can be up here in this tree, and nobody will go after me, nobody make fun of me, nobody try to kill me, and I can still get a look at this one named Jesus Christ. So the next verse, Luke 19:7. All the people saw this. Saw what? What I just read. Jesus reached the spot. He looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter. That's a really great word, mutter. I mean, we know what it means. We don't ever use it anymore probably, but mutter is what you do when you're mad about something at the grocery store, or somebody says something, or you see a sign, or you see somebody protesting something on the other side of whatever you think, and it's so easy to mutter, right? In fact, let's try that for a second, just to enter into the passage. Everybody for about 10 seconds just mutter. Mutter, mutter, mutter. That's really good. Way to go. You guys are entering the biblical story. Love that. He's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Mutter. All the people saw this. They're out to see the parade. Here comes Jesus. And maybe you've heard this story a million times. You've been around Young Life, man. We tell this a lot in Young Life. And here's the interesting thing. As he's walking through, they're on board with Jesus. The crowd is excited to be there. Zacchaeus comes out of his own journey, his own story, heard about Jesus, couldn't really find a way to see him, climbs in the tree and looks down thinking he can get away with his anonymity. But Jesus flips the script, stops, and the whole crowd's kind of paralyzed. What is happening? He looks up, and he calls him by name. Zacchaeus, get down here. I'm going to your house for dinner. And he hurries down. He's gone to be the guest of a sinner. How dare he? Why would Jesus do something like that? This is an enemy of Israel. This is a person that steals from his own people. He's wealthy because he's ripped us off. He's protected by the Roman authority and Roman soldiers. He's one of them. What's the matter? What's happening here? Thus, mutter, 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 mutter. Love that word. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Lord, look, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, that's a title for himself, came to seek and save the lost. What? What? What happens here? He's on the wrong side. We are here. We are the good people. We are the right people standing on the side cheering for you as you come through the town, Jesus. And here's this tax collector that you call him by name and you say you're going to go even have a meal with him, which was a big deal in that culture. This is what's called Christ-like empathy. Empathy is not just a word, like Renee said, where I enter into your pain alongside of you so that you will know you have a companion in the midst of your suffering. That's essentially the definition that she's talking about. Sympathy is a disconnection from that. But empathy is this commitment to say, no matter who you are, no matter what you're going through, I will enter into your story with grace and tenderness and kindness. And empathy, that kind of empathy has taken a lot of hits in our culture the last few years. Because a lot of people say, that means you are accepting their behavior. That means you are affirming how they live their lives or what they think and how they're living. But I tell you, It's interesting, in this passage, we see a Christ-like empathy that goes much deeper than even Brene talked about it. And you almost can't find a passage of Scripture that deals with somebody who's been somehow cast aside for whatever reason without seeing how Jesus brings this characteristic that we know as empathy into someone's life that is a model for all of us. Here's what we see, Christ-like empathy. 1, Jesus knew him. Jesus knew his name. We don't know if Jesus asked somebody, who is this guy up in the tree? Maybe he did. We don't know. Maybe he just knew his name because, of course, he was God. But he called him by name. He crossed the bridge from this distant treatment of another person, especially an enemy of Israel at the time, tax collector, the worst of the worst. In fact, tax collectors are with prostitutes and people that actually go for the Raiders. I mean, these are all kind of people that are all in the same kind of category. Well, or the Blue Jays, I guess I could say the Blue Jays too. What's interesting about this, when Jesus called them by name, it was a massive scandal. Really? You're not only calling him out the tree, but you're calling him by name, and you seem to be saying it with kindness in your voice. That's empathy. He's entering into a relationship with this person. But the second thing that happens is he entered into his life. He said, I'm going to go home with you, and I'm going to eat a meal with you, which in the Hebrew culture so powerfully demonstrated the recognition that we're in life together. To the Jewish people, a meal meant we are brothers and sisters, and we walk through life together, and we celebrate that through a meal. And Jesus invites himself to dinner. Let's eat. And then lastly, Jesus affirmed his value and dignity simply by how he treated him. I'm going to go home with you. There's a lot of people I could go home with Zacchaeus. He does not mention a word of Zacchaeus' sin, brokenness, arrogance, the way he treated people unjustly, his lifestyle. Tax collectors were known for a lifestyle was the antithesis of what the Jews thought was true and appropriate. But Jesus knew him, called him by name. Jesus entered into his life, and Jesus affirmed his value and dignity. Paul teaches us this is the essence of faith. Empathy is not a word that's in your English Bibles. But empathy is a concept that is found throughout the Scriptures and especially in the life of Jesus. Now, as people take shots at this word, and is there too much empathy ever? Does empathy mean I am somehow affirming how someone else lives? Jesus talks about that with his parable about the log in the eye. First take the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of your neighbor's. Jesus talks a lot about, sure, there are specks to be taken out. There's conversations to be had, but do we allow ourselves to realize that this is a person that Jesus knit together in their mother's womb? That this is someone that God cherishes and loves so deeply that he knows their name, calls him out of the tree, says, I'm going to go into that intimate place of a meal with you, and I'm going to treat you with the value and dignity of you being my child. Well, now let's go to a place, because the metaphor we've been using along the way is this metaphor of what are we putting on? What's our fit check? What do we wear? What do we present to the world? What do you fight for? Colossians 3 in the Message just puts it very beautifully this way. Paul's telling the followers of Jesus, here's how you live as we model the Master. Don't lie to each other. You're done with that old life. It's like a filthy set of ill-fitting clothes that you've stripped off and put in the fire. Now you're dressed in a new wardrobe. Every item in your new way of life is custom made by the Creator. with his label on it. All the old fashions are now obsolete. Words like Jewish and non-Jewish, religious and irreligious, insider and outsider, uncivilized and uncouth, slave and free mean nothing. From now on, everyone is defined by Christ. Everyone is included in Christ. What is it we do, Paul? How do we live in a world that's so fractured back in first century Palestine to the world we live in today, whether we're online or here this morning? Paul goes on, this is the Message translation. So, chosen by God for this new life of love, that's talking to you and me. Dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. Ever since I heard that line about empathy being the greatest weakness of Western civilization, caring too much and therefore affirming other people's failures, I don't see that in Jesus. To use the phrase caring too much with Jesus Christ-like empathy is nonsensical, because he constantly and consistently demonstrated a level of compassion that transcends our behavior and the expressions of our own brokenness. But when it's so easy for us to feel like we are lining up, marshaling our forces to make sure that those people need to get fixed, that's not who Jesus calls us to be. Chosen by God for this new life of love, dressed in the wardrobe God picked out for you in those words: compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, and discipline. Then he goes on, be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense, and regardless of what else you put on, wear love. Regardless of what else you put on, wear love. Regardless of what else you put on, chap. Whatever else you put on, fit check. Wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. What am I wearing? Dressed in the wardrobe God picked out for you: compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline, and love. Without empathy, without Christ-like empathy, to be able to enter along someone else's journey and never forget they still have value and dignity because Jesus declares it so. And therefore, when Jesus comes into someone's life and we come in representing him, we come in with an empathy that says, I don't just have sympathy from a distance. I don't just have the presence of an empathetic response of identification, but I come in with the conviction that I am here following Jesus to somehow pull you out of your circumstances so that you may be redeemed. In other words, a follower of Jesus realizes I'm no different than anybody else that's desperate for empathy. And without empathy, we can't live out those other 5 things: compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Without empathy, these are impossible. Toxicity comes from the condemner, not the condemned. When we say that empathy can be toxic, that's even the name of a book. You care too much, thus you're giving them a free pass for their sin. That's the essential argument. Whatever political stripe, it's happening from all corners of our ideological stew that we all are swimming in. So first, got 2 things for you. 1, every day ask yourself, who or what do I let into my mind and heart to tell me how to think, how to live, how to talk about or treat others, and how to view the world? Who do I listen to? Who is teaching me whether there's truth in toxic empathy or whether the Christ-like empathy actually is what God is calling us all to? And alongside-edness, because I can identify with a person trying to figure it out just like I am. But when we come with the power and the invitation of Jesus, we come with the strength of the Holy Spirit who is there to redeem all things to himself. And the world needs the hope of Jesus Christ and the power of the Spirit as he brings his kingdom in. Toxic empathy, caring too much, is simply false. Who are we listening to? Who are we giving permission to tell us how to think about other people? How are we allowing ourselves to be drawn in to the myth of the emperor's clothes? It took a little boy in Hans Christian Andersen's story to look and say, why is everybody just clapping and praising the new wardrobe? He's naked as the day he was born, the little boy says in the story. It's a sham. So much of the noise is simply a sham. Who do we listen to? Who do we trust? And my friends, no matter where you are in your journey with Jesus, just know, if you're going to look in the eyes of Jesus, follow Jesus. And make your determination of how to think and how to live according to him and who he calls you to be, because all of us are Zacchaeus. We all are in that tree. And he calls us by name, calls us down. It's quite dangerous to follow the voices that tell us, be careful of caring too much. Pick your side. Jesus stands tall in the middle of that, and that's what the beauty of his calling is. Trust me, follow me, know me. I'm coming to your house for dinner. And the second thing is, how do you actually get over this? The discipline to every day commit your heart and mind to follow Jesus and put on love. As Colossians 3:14 says, and regardless of what else you put on, regardless of what else you put on, regardless of what else, chap, you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. Help me to wear love today. My friends at HCC, wherever you are in your journey with Jesus, whatever stirs your heart, wherever you mutter, the Lord has come to call you out of the tree of trying to figure out who's in and who's out, who you like, who you don't, who's safe, who's not. Come to him and let him teach you what it means to wear love. And in so doing, we will become men and women who serve the King's purposes to bring all people to health and wholeness through himself. May we, HCC, this is why we do Road Trip. May we wear love. God, give us ears to hear. Give us a heart to hear. Help us, convict us with the voices that we give ourselves to the energy and time, maybe resources, to those voices that would draw us away from anything you call us to be, and that is someone who wears love with a faithfulness to follow you. Well, I don't think I would have called Zacchaeus down. I didn't like him. But you love him. And you love me, and you love these friends. Teach us to wear love in your name.